All right, well, I'm not exactly sure how much longer the standing around and talking part of the pre-program goes, but in Presbyterian we say we are at docket time, and we do have a quorum, and so it seems like it's a good time for me to welcome you to Binghamton United Presbyterian Church. I'm Kimberly Chastain. I'm the senior pastor here. You have probably seen my associate pastor tootling around in a turquoise wheelchair, and she is out in the lobby right now, but she joins in welcoming. Things you need to know. Bathrooms are that way. Emergency exits are all around you. You can go out the front, you can go out that way and out. There will be, about 6 o'clock, some of the guests for our shelter for the unhoused in Binghamton will be starting to gather. They know the rules and are perfectly harmless, but they may be on the deck when you go out because we admit people at 7. I think that's everything I need. Oh, and there's water back here for you all, which I will pour as needed. I think that's everything as host. We're having a conversation tonight about the white Christian nationalism, specifically in the Southern Tier. We want to better understand white Christian nationalism and to learn more about how it has manifested itself in this region. This conversation is sponsored by United Presbyterian Church, the Religious Nationalisms Project, which you'll hear more about, the New York State Council of Churches, and the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America. And the purpose of the Religious Nationalisms Project is to create public space where communities can talk about how a religion gets adopted and then twisted and distorted to oppress religious minorities, people of different races, and even people of the same faith. Today we will focus on one particular nationalism, which is embedded in the Southern Tier, and I'll say more about that in a little while, but it's important to realize that before there was any white settlement here, there was an Iroquois village known as Oshenong, and they are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederation, and we acknowledge that they continue to live and thrive and to continue their culture in spite of all that has been done to make sure that they don't feel that they are on their land anymore. And so I thought we should begin by reading a Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, which is a greeting to the natural world that is said before anything else is done in any gathering of the Haudenosaunee people. Today we've gathered and we see that cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. We are all thankful to our Mother, the Earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk about upon her. It gives us joy that she continues to care as she has from the beginning of our time. To our Mother we send greetings and thanks. We give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us strength. Water is life. We know its power in many forms: waterfall and rain, mist and stream, river and ocean. With one mind, we send greeting and thanks to the Spirit of water. We turn our minds to all the fish life in the water They were instructed to cleanse and purify the water. They also give themselves to us as food. We are grateful that we can still find pure water. So we turn to the fish and send our greetings and thanks. Now we turn toward the vast fields of plant life. As far as the eye can see, the plants grow, working many wonders. They sustain many life forms. With our minds gathered together, we give thanks and look forward to seeing plant life for many generations. We are all thankful for the powers we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help us to bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. We put our minds together to give thanks to our oldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. She is the leader of women all over the world, and she governs the movement of the ocean tides. By her changing face, we measure time, and it is the moon who watches over the arrival of children here on earth. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to our grandmother, the moon. And we send greetings and thanks to our eldest brother, the sun. Each day without fail, he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the light of the new day. He is the source of all the fires of life. With one mind, we send greeting and thanks to our brother, the sun. Now we turn our thoughts to the Creator or Great Spirit and send greetings and thanks for all the gifts of creation. Everything we need to live a good life is here on this earth, our mother. For the love that is still around us, we gather our minds together as one and send our choicest words of greeting and thanks to the Creator. Now, our minds are one. It is a privilege and an honor to welcome you all here for this conversation tonight, and also to introduce to you Professor David Cingranelli. Professor Cingranelli is the Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Binghamton University. He conducts global comparative econometric research examining the causes and consequences of variation in government respect for various human rights. He's written widely on human rights. He's the former president of the Human Rights Section of the American Political Science Association. And until 2012, he served as co-director of the CIRI Human Rights Data Project. And he and his colleague, Mikhail Filippov, are working in collaboration on a successor called the CI Rights Data Project. And you'll have to ask him about that, because I've just told you more than I know. But he spoke with us when we did an introduction to the question of white nationalism at Binghamton University. And I learned so much from him, I asked him if he would come back and join us tonight. So David, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. I do thank you for coming out tonight. I'm hoping we have an interesting discussion. And I wanted to begin by trying to define what nationalism means, Christian nationalism, and then finally I'm going to speak a little bit about white Christian nationalism. I'm going to take a step back and just say that my whole career has been about human rights, and the central idea behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created in 1948 by a group of UN representatives chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, is this idea that the most important thing in a society is for individuals to have as much freedom and liberty as possible, as long as they're not interfering with the freedom and liberty of other people. And this whole idea of Christian nationalism, to me, opposes that idea. So I start out very honestly as somebody who is against the idea of Christian nationalism. I'm not against Christians. I guess I am against nationalism, and definitely against white Christian nationalism. So that's where I come from. And I wanted to begin with a definition because I don't think we would all agree. If I had asked you all to write it down, what you thought it meant, I'm sure that there would be lots of different meanings in this group, and probably my students would have the same problem. If I asked them to write a definition of human rights, we would get as many different definitions as we have of students in the class. So nationalism is a political, economic, and social ideology and movement that contends that the ideas, the ideology that was dominant among the people who wrote the Constitution should be enshrined and promoted in our daily life today. So the argument goes further that those people were Christians, among other things, and therefore we should promote, as an act of patriotism, we should enact public policies that promote Christianity in the world today. So it's closely linked to patriotism, but patriotism of a particular kind that emphasizes the social contract that we all joined when we were born into a nation that had a constitution. We didn't revolt against it, so we accepted it. We weren't there when it was created, but by not rebelling, we've accepted that, is the way it goes. And that newcomers, so I want to say one other thing, is that it privileges the people of the past over anybody who came since, and certainly people who are recent arrivals in the United States. Christian nationalism argues that the United States was created as a Christian nation, and that is contested, right? Because the framers, the people who wrote our Constitution, were not, I don't think they were Christians. They believed in God. They were what we would normally call deists. They didn't really particularly care what kind of God you worshiped or whether you worshiped God at all. They themselves, I think, believed in God. But what Christian nationalism tries to do is to claim that the role of government should not be to maximize the freedom of all individuals to do what they wish, as long as they don't hurt others, but to translate Christian ideas into public policy. That should be the role of government. And I think that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is not consistent with that idea. It says Congress cannot make laws that establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise of religion. And it's been interpreted by the courts of the United States further to mean that government can't require or favor any one religion, and it protects the right to live by your own religious beliefs or none at all if you don't have any. Similarly, the phrase separation of church and state is not included in the U.S. Constitution, but the idea is embedded in our legal system, and the government is run by the people and its elected representatives, not any church. And separation of church and state is a really major tenet of the American political system, and one that I believe in deeply. It's not anti-religion. The human right to freedom of religion is protected in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, and this right includes the freedom to practice one's religion, change one's religion, and to teach one's religion in public or private without any interference. So that's what I think nationalism threatens. It threatens this idea that we should have a separation of church and state, and the idea that government should not privilege the adherence of any one religious group over others should stay out of. It should be a purely personal matter, whether you believe in God and which God you believe in, what church you attend. And so let's go further. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, that too is contested. I mean, who are these Christians that have this nationalist idea? And this is kind of controversial too. I mean, I've seen some people say that the only Christians are evangelical Protestants, that Catholics and mainstream Protestants are not the Christians they're talking about. And Jews certainly are not part of the group that they're talking about. So it's this fairly small group who identify as Christians who have more or less championed this movement of abolishing the separation of church and state and the attempt to legislate certain religious beliefs among evangelical Protestants, which I'll detail a little bit in a few minutes. Make that into law. So generally, religious scholars, sociologists, and others who study Christian nationalism describe it as a belief that the United States is a country defined by Christianity, and in practice this means the government should take steps to keep the country's Christian roots and identity intact. Make sure it's not threatened by any outside groups. The government should advocate Christian values and pass laws and enact policies that reflect those values. The separation of church and state is not a formal law that should be followed. Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that publicly. God's plan is for the U.S. to be a successful nation based on Christian ideals. Both evolutionary theory and the theory that the world was created by God should be taught in public schools as equally valid. The 10 Commandments should be displayed in every public school classroom. Louisiana has already done this. Abortion should be banned. And since the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court not that long ago, approximately 1/3 of American women have lost their right to have an abortion, even if they and their doctors believe that they should have one for their health reasons. And the last thing that's really big in the news right now is that trans people should be punished. Note that Proposition 1, which is on the ballot right now, is about guaranteeing freedom from discrimination. But the political campaign right now is focused on saving girls' sports from infiltration, which I think is a real red herring here and is not a good thing at all. And the last thing I want to say is we often, when people talk about Christian nationalism, they often preface it with white Christian nationalism. And I wondered why. So I thought about that a little bit, and I did a little bit of research. The term emphasizes that while many black Americans are Protestants, there's little support for the Republican Party and these ideas among American blacks. Most black Americans vote for Democrats, and this is probably because American blacks strongly support the First Amendment's version of freedom of religion and the separation of church and state, and are suspicious of government playing a role in an individual's choice to believe or not believe in what to believe in. And the idea that the Christian nationalism effort is essentially racist is rooted in the related idea of replacement theory, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but it's the false idea that a cabal is attempting to replace white Americans with non-white people through immigration, interracial marriage, and eventually violence. And this theory was central to the manifesto released by the Broome County resident who committed a mass shooting in Buffalo in 2022. And with that, I will turn this over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Just me again. David did a good thing introducing us to a lot of the themes that we're hoping to talk about tonight. I wanted to give a little bit of historical context to the conversation about white Christian nationalism and the way it's functioned in the Southern Tier. You've already heard me say that we have, we're on Haudenosaunee land, and we have histories written that say things like, control of the region was wrested from the savages when James Clinton and John Sullivan won a decisive victory at Newtown, now Elmira, New York. And the pattern that we have seen is, well, that was then, and now we're much better. Civil War came, we had stops on the Underground Railroad here in Binghamton, and it's easy to ignore that we had enslavement protected on the transportation systems that were going through here at the time. And the Underground Railroad was underground for a reason, that it was not considered to be something that was widely accepted here. Fast forward through Reconstruction to the turn of the 20th century and World War I, when the bad guys were barbarians in Eastern Europe. After World War I, we had a groundswell of the KKK in the southern tier. Binghamton was the New York State headquarters for the KKK in the 1920s. And there was still a sign on the building until 1974 that let people know this is where the KKK was headquartered in that time. And if you read the history that is on the Binghamton website, it will tell you that in order to combat that, there was a real effort to bring in immigrants, and the Which Way EJ and the whole Johnson City bringing in of people to do work, except that didn't count the Irish or the Italians. And so then we had corrections trying to build up Italian and Irish pride at the expense of those black and brown and other people that were trying to take away our rights and our land. And I'm not making this language up. This is all over the place. And then we get into the late 20s is the rise of Nazism. And the Christian Nazi movement in the United States was overwhelming. And we have pictures of marches of the Nazi movement in downtown Binghamton from the newspapers at the time. It's not new that people have been led into suspicion of what is different by their fears. I got here in Binghamton in 2013, and a couple of years before, there had been a shooting at the American Civic Association, and 15 new immigrants were killed. And the town came together, and we started to have conversations about what that meant, and out of that came an organization called the Children of Abraham. And we were talking and attempting to find some common ground among our differences, because it was playing out in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim rhetoric. And the funny thing is, nobody seemed to realize that the reason nobody was talking about black people was that most people didn't realize there were any black people in Binghamton. And since I've been here, we've learned more about that, but we've also learned that we don't talk about that stuff as nice white people. And we only listen to what people say to us when it's couched in the terms that are acceptable, the language that is acceptable to us. And so we have the option as white people in Binghamton to ignore what happens around us, or at least to mute it to a point where we can live with what's happening. And I guess that's where I want to leave it right now, because left to my own devices, I can rant for hours on these subjects. I do want to turn it over, really, to the Nationalisms Project and to Reverend Peter Cook, who is the Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches and one of the co-directors of the project. And he is going to take it from here and direct our conversation. So thank you.
So I'm Peter Cook. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches. We are comprised of 9 denominations and 7,500 congregations across the state of New York. And of course, the Presbyterian Church was one of our founding partners, still a partner today. Founded in 1893. And we were really very committed to the idea of the social gospel, which lives into the idea that salvation is not just a personal matter, but it's a societal matter where we have to address the structures that separate us from God, whether that be racism or wealth inequality, or the way we treat immigrants, or housing, or child labor, or any number of other subjects. And we still do that work today, where we try to develop policies at the state and federal level, which we think help to strengthen the social safety net and give voice to those who are oppressed and dispossessed in our state and in our world. We also help congregations repurpose their property to build affordable housing, and we have a solar program where churches can adopt community solar to save money on their electric bill, and also offer that benefit to their parishioners, so that that the church would receive $100 for every parishioner they sign up. So it's a way to make some money and save the environment at the same time. We also certify chaplains in the state prison system, but one of our big projects is the Religious Nationalisms Project. And and we started this initiative, the Council of Churches, along with the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America. And together, these two organizations have principles. I'm one of the principals. My colleague, Reverend Neil Christie, is the other one, principal, who you'll hear from in just a moment. But we really started this initiative because we saw different organizations focus on one form of religious nationalism, but not appreciating the connection of their particular nationalism to other nationalisms, whether that be Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, or, of course, Christian. Sadly, we live in a highly polarized political and media environment where different religious groups have very low levels of trust when speaking to other religious groups. And we often have these interfaith dialogues, but they start to fall apart when you get a crisis because we're really not talking with each other about the difficult things. We're just talking about the fluffy stuff. And when you have difficult things happen, for instance, like October 11th, we're really not very well equipped for being able to talk to one another. So we're trying to create a public space across the country and in New York State where we can discuss these most controversial and substantive matters related to religious nationalisms when it may be difficult to carry the conversation with just one organization. And so we work with an operative definition of religious nationalism, which is it's the propensity of a government to adopt a religion and twist that religion to undermine democracy and suppress the voice of religious minorities and often people of different races, and also to suppress the voice of people who share the same religion adopted by the state, but who have a very different understanding of that religion. So you certainly see that playing out when we talk about Christian nationalism, which you so eloquently laid out, and where Kimberly gave us some very helpful local history, and you may feel as a Christian that you can't find yourself in this conversation, that what gets purported as Christian doesn't feel Christian at all to you. And a lot of times Christians who try to raise objections about how their faith is getting twisted could find themselves ostracized or criticized or shunned or demonized in some way. And that's a very typical tactic which is used by people who adopt the dominant religion to oppress others in all religious groups, not just Christianity. So with that, we think it's helpful to just lift up a few positive attributes of Christianity. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Neil Christie to lead us in that conversation.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Hi, friends. So in a moment, we're going to actually be asking you all a question. You've been listening so well. It's time to hear a little bit from you about your stories, your scriptures, your images that come from the Christian story, the Christian narrative, the text, that give you some sense of hope. Let me share this first, though. One of the motifs of Christian nationalism is its adept use and appropriation of Christian symbols, right? So we have the appropriation of images of the cross. We have use of prayer in authentic ways, and yet used in ways that manipulate the message and further their particular message. We have images of church. We have appeals to the text, and so where we have scriptural references, especially in both the Hebrew text and the New Testament, it's there. Whether it's the Psalms, which talk about God blessing the nation and that sense of American exceptionalism, U.S. exceptionalism, or God blessing a country so that it can be an aggressive force against heathen nations. Even the notion of the city on a hill, which influenced some of the early writings, and the founders of this nation have been appropriated in such a way that American exceptionalism is really the only interpretation you can give to a city on a hill, or a city to be a light unto the nations. The notion of New Israel, right? That we are now not just replacement of being replaced, but we need to claim that sense that we are the new Israel. We are the chosen people. And so there are these odd aberrations. So when we hear some of that and see some of that through the media, filtered through the media, I invite us as people of faith, as Christians, seeing these images through the media, absorbing them, hearing them perhaps from our family, our friends, our neighbors, co-workers, and it sort of comes off the tip of their tongue. It may not immediately sound like Christian nationalism, but I would challenge us that it sort of is that slippery slope into Christian nationalism. And so I want to remind us again of our particular calling as Christians. We place Jesus at the center of the conversation, and we rely deeply on the Jewish notion, the Shema, what is the first commandment? What does Jesus say? First, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul. And the second commandment, Jesus says, is this, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments are based on the law and all the prophets. So loving our neighbor as ourself. The challenge really is, how do we live with our neighbor? Neighbor is not necessarily defined by proximity. Neighbor could be someone who's miles away on the other side of the world, someone who is so unlike us it's hard to imagine that we have any common resemblance. Those are our neighbors. But this notion of love of neighbor, love of God, that they're intrinsically bound together, is at the very core of the faith of Jesus and the faith of those who follow Jesus. And so my question for you all is this: which scriptures, which texts in particular build you up, right? Speak to you so that you can resist those misinterpretations, those aberrations that come from Christian nationalism. What are the scriptures that really buoy you up, lift you up, give you hope? It's the first part of the question. And not just give you hope to resist, but also give you a vision of what it means to be a true Christian when Christian nationalism as a worldview is becoming more and more an accepted and predominant message in so many public spaces today. And so that's my question for you, and we just invite you to share where you are. What are some of the images? What are the scriptures? Matthew 25. Or was Matthew 25? Is it a part of Matthew 25 or the whole thing? Whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. All right. This is W3.
Okay, now it's on. Yes, because this is being recorded, if you can shout into the microphone as opposed to off the microphone, then people can hear. So I'm going to give this back to Harold.
Matthew 25 says, whatever you've done to the least of one of these, you've done to me. And it allows us to see Jesus in those who may be marginalized.
I'm not terribly well founded on scriptures, but if I had to say, from whatever text it is, welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and the second thing would be the Sermon on the Mount.
Others. Thanks, others. Other scriptures or other even Christian images that really buoy you up to build a sense of resilience when we hear these messages, when we see these things. Yeah. Sorry to do that to the camera.
I got it.
Okay.
Yes, the other part, I think it's, you'll correct me if I get this wrong, I think it's Galatians chapter 5 somewhere, that it says, it follows up with what you're saying. The first rule is to love one another, and then the very next verse is, and if you don't follow this, you'll end up devouring each other and really hurting each other if you don't love one another. And it feels like that has a lesson for what you're talking about.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone on our panel? Yeah.
There's a story in Luke, and I forget exactly where it lands, but it's the persistent widow who goes to the judge and says, grant me justice against my adversary. And the judge refuses to do it, but she continues. And there's this message when Jesus is telling that story of there are powers in place right now that will ignore you and will not grant you justice. However, you can persist and wear them down. Thank you, Jesus, for that message, that truth is still truth, even if powers refuse to notice it.
Thank you. Others? Anyone else? A scripture, a Christian image. Yeah.
I would say also that nationalism always depends on religion to support the use of violence. So when we come to Scripture, love your enemies is a cornerstone of nonviolence that makes Christianity inaccessible to nationalism if we really practice it.
Thank you.
Specific to Christian nationalism, I find it very helpful to read some of the correctives in the Hebrew Bible where people who misuse religion in order to further their own ends end up having judgment pronounced on them. For example, Nathan, Elijah, some of the other the bigger prophets, obviously, but I often see things that say, well, the Old Testament version of it is violent and ugly, and the New Testament version is Jesus, and he loves us. And Jesus lived and died an observant Jew. And so I worry when we use those texts and we don't hear the corrective that's right there in the texts.
Thank you. One more. Anyone? Anything that's been taught to you that helps you? Yes, sir.
The parable of the Good Samaritan.
You anticipated my closing piece here. Share more. Why the parable of the Good Samaritan?
Because Jesus picks the alien as the hero.
Thank you. So Jesus picks the alien as the hero. So the person who is the hero of the story, right, is the wrong race, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong nationality, according to the dominant culture, yeah? And this is the one, in other words, this is the one who befriends. This is where the alliance happens. This is where the alliance happens. That is antithetical to notions of Christian nationalism. It's also antithetical to notions of nationalism that is exclusive and excluding. I think that's important as well. It's a challenge to our notions of what nationalism is. And I want to end with a scripture that's very familiar to you all, and it comes from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, where he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. God has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," the Jubilee. And then Jesus rolled up the scroll and gave it back to them. And so for these words, we know what happened. Jesus was killed by the empire. Jesus gave his life for this. And so here is the challenge with Christian nationalism and the cost at times when we stand up to Christian nationalism. Now the challenge is, how do we do this as community? so that one person never, ever has to stand alone. So I invite you to continue to reflect on what will build resilience as we are challenged by Christian nationalism, and how do we make sure we educate, we correct people who otherwise would live into these aberrations of the text that is so near and dear to all of our hearts and lives.
One of the central features of Christian nationalism is replacement theory, which is really premised on the idea that white people who feel very threatened about their power, and they're very worried that immigrants and black people in particular might take that power away. And this idea really gets embedded in our political rhetoric. You've probably noticed one or two political ads here in the Southern Tier with one particular candidate who is telling us that we should be as scared as possible of illegal aliens who are coming to take your jobs, or who might kill you, or might replace you, and to vote for him, and he'll be sure to straighten that all out and send people back. That is deeply rooted in replacement theory. And you also saw this display, say at Madison Square Garden, a couple weeks ago, or almost like a week ago, where you had a comedian referring to Puerto Rico as garbage, and talking about how Latinos were infiltrating and populating the country, and used really rather vivid sexual imagery to suggest that we were being outnumbered by Latinos who like to populate, as he said. So those are just a couple of examples that set the stage for our conversation here today, that the shooter from Conklin, from Broome County, was deeply influenced by this replacement theory. And it's easy to just pick on him, but he really is the byproduct of a whole culture that gives a lot of permission to the idea that immigrants and people of color are a threat who need to be eliminated. So, I can think of no one who could help us give a window into how this replacement theory works in the most personal of ways. And we want to welcome Buffalo's former fire commissioner, Garfield Whitfield Jr., who is also the son of Ruth Whitfield, who was one of 10 people who died at the hands of the top supermarket shooter, whose manifesto, as I said, was heavily laced with replacement theory, that immigrants and black people need to have their power diminished for fear that they are taking over our country and diminishing the power of white people. It's important to acknowledge that the shooter came from Broome County to commit this massacre. And Mr. Whitfield, I think we need to acknowledge, is making himself a bit vulnerable to come here today, taking some risks to be here with us. But he wanted to come because he has a story to tell and wants to explore with you what happened and how he is making sense of this tragic event now and engaging this community about the pain of this event and the ideologies that inspired it that are still operating in this community and in Buffalo and across our country, and so that we can think together about how to make amends and move forward. Mr. Whitfield, since his mother's death, has become a national spokesperson against white supremacy and mass violence, testifying to Congress and introducing President Biden in the White Rose Garden as he signed the most significant gun control legislation in 30 years. What he said is, when we face hate, there's an instinct to say we're better than that, but we're only better if we say something and do something. The cancer of white supremacy must be confronted where it exists, which is why I am traveling all over our state in conjunction with the New York State Council Churches and the Religious Nationalisms Project to speak out. And so it's my honor to introduce to you Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you, Reverend Cook. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. You have to know how discomforting it is for me to be here. Quite frankly, on the ride here, every bump, every mile postmarker, every mile that it took to get here reminded me of what it took for the shooter to get to Buffalo, to do what he did. But at the same time, when I thought about his intentionality, we as Christians, as believers, have to be just as intentional about fighting white nationalism and white supremacy. And I know we're here dealing with white nationalism, but for me, white supremacy, there's no difference. There's no difference for me, okay? So if I might just center us. Roberta Jury, Marcus D. Morrison, Andre McNeil, Aaron Salter, Geraldine Talley, Celestine Cheney, Hayward Patterson, Catherine Massey, Pearl Young, and my mother, Mrs. Ruth E. Whitfield, are the names of those that died at the hands of one of your neighbors. I'm here because I have to be here. I'm here because I need to share with you. You've heard a lot of the facts and a lot of the things associated with white nationalism, white supremacy, but I need to talk about the impact, the practical impact of the application of those beliefs. And let me just say that in listening to all of the things, the definitions and all of the things that these people believe, they're all rooted in a false narrative. None of it's true. None of it's true. So I'm just going to tell you my story. My mother was 86 years old when she was murdered. She had just left the nursing home visiting my father, which she did every day for the previous 10 years. She was his caretaker. They were married for 68 years. I have 2 sisters and a brother. I've got 9 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, 4 children. We have a big family. This has devastated my family, not just mine, but the others also. It has devastated us as a community, and it is still very, very much present to this day. It's never going to go away. I have to say, this is my first exposure to anybody from this community, and that's a problem. That is a problem. We cannot sit comfortably by when these things happen without accepting our responsibility first as human beings, as Christians, as believers. We have a duty. We have a duty to take care of each other, to acknowledge what is going on in our communities. I can tell you that, I'll say that. So, my mom was the smartest, most loving person that I've ever known, and I'm not just saying that. She is the closest thing to God's love that I've ever experienced. And I'm married, and my wife knows that I say these things. So my mother loved unconditionally. Unconditionally. Not because I deserved it, but she loved me anyhow. That's who she was. And she didn't just do it for me. She did it for the least of these, as you said. That's who she was. For her to be murdered in the manner that she was is something that I'll never, ever, ever be able to wrap my head around, for this to happen to her. But I've worked very, very, very hard to try to make sense of this. And it's not something that, should be made sense of. The truth of the matter is that I could very, very easily be very, very angry and very much want to exact some kind of vengeance or retribution or whatever you want to call it. I could have that in my heart very easily. So, having been raised in the church, and Reverend Bell is my pastor and a lifelong member of the Durham Memorial AME Zion Church, we were taught to love. In spite of how other people treated us, that's what we were taught. And so that's what I've tried to do. And so for me to be able to process this, I'm going to tell you a little story and you'll understand. On May 13th, I spent the entire day with my mother. I was building her a raised garden because she could no longer bend over and till the soil. She could hardly walk. She was in such pain. Her back was bad. As I built this thing, as I was finishing it up that day on the 13th, she was out there. She brought me some lemonade and that, and talked to me about what I was going to do with the rest of my life, because I was retired, and she was very concerned about what I was going to do. So we had these conversations as I worked on her garden, and she made a couple of comments. She said that that it looked like a casket. And I'm saying, Mom, that's morbid, that's morbid, Mom. And she said, yeah, it does. It looks like you could bury somebody. And I said, well, Mom, we're going to bury seeds. We're going to plant seeds in this thing, right? She said, okay, I'm going to go get seeds and plant seeds in it. Tomorrow we'll plant the seeds. I said, okay, I'm going to come back in the morning and put some more soil in it, raise it up a little higher, and it'll be ready for planting. I came back 7 o'clock, 7:30 the next morning, put the soil in there, knocked on the door, didn't answer. Didn't get an answer, and she didn't have her hearing aids in, and I didn't want to disturb her. I didn't know if she was asleep, so I left. Said I would meet her up at the nursing home because we often met there. That was the 14th of May. I never saw my mother again. Which, if I'm going to be honest, we oftentimes put things off. We oftentimes say, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do something later on, right? I wish I would have disturbed my mother, I wish I would have disturbed her that morning, but I didn't. So here's where I'm at. Seeing my mom hardly be able to walk that day, the day before she died. What you have to know about my mother is that she was always comfortable with death. She would talk about it from the time we were kids. She looked forward to going home to be with her Creator. She wasn't in a hurry to do it, but she looked forward. She believed in that she would be rewarded at the end of life. That was her belief, and so she talked about it freely and openly. But she would never have left her family. She would never have left her husband. She had been ready to go. She was in pain. She went up for the last 10 years, pouring into my father, loving him in a way that he could never reciprocate. He has dementia. He can't love her back. My mom was lonely. She was in pain. I believe in my heart that my Lord and Savior had mercy on her. And this young man came from your community to Buffalo to start a race war. Tried to kill as many blacks as he could. You know, he had read the things about the replacement theory, so he felt the need to do something. So he came to Buffalo and do that. He killed my mother. But in my mind, my Lord and Savior used him to bring my mother home, because she would never have gone on her own. She was ready. So what the shooter meant for bad, God meant for good. My mother's at peace with him, is resting with him. And I'm comforted in that. But not only did the shooter, not only was he used by God to send my mother, to bring my mother home, he was also used to move me from where I was at, from a place of false sense of security. I was retired, enjoying the fruits of my labor, you know. I was looking maybe at a warmer climate, my wife and I, thinking about our future, traveling and that. But God had need of me. And so from that point forward, for the rest of my life, this is my work. This is my ministry. This is what I'm going to be doing. And I was convicted. I was convicted in my heart when my mother died, because I felt like I was complicit in what happened to her, because I was just like most other people. I'm not going to say like you, because I don't know you, but I was sitting in church pews. I was comfortable, you know. I believed in God. I heard about things in the world going on. I had empathy, you know. I cared about other people, but I never did anything. I never did anything. And maybe if I had done something prior to 5/14, maybe 5/14 doesn't happen. And so my challenge is to you is, why are you here? I'm here because I've been convicted. I accept my responsibility for what's going on in the world. I didn't have anything to do with my mother's death, but in my silence, in my false sense of comfort, you know, I'm complicit, especially as a Christian. I don't believe that God is passive. I don't believe that Jesus is passive. I don't believe any of that. I believe that we have a part to play. We have a role to play. And I'm here because I want to know how you feel. I'm telling you how I feel. I'm sharing with you because I want to know. I need to know what's going on in your hearts and in your minds, what's going on in this community, what's going on in this world. And this is how we resolve these issues, by sharing honestly, being vulnerable, and being truthful about who we are, what we want, where we are, And so I hope that we can start a dialogue, and I hope that you will search your own hearts and your own minds. And, you know, when you return to your homes, to your families, that you have these difficult conversations about what's going on in the world and what role are you playing in it. Because in your silence, you're complicit. Okay? I thank you for having me here. I could go on and on. I'm trying to be as brief as possible, but I'm very interested in knowing what you think about any of this. So thank you for having me.
I'd like to invite two brief responses from Douglas Taylor. I'd like to invite two brief responses from Douglas Taylor, and also who is the pastor at the Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Binghamton, and also the Reverend Damon Wilson, who's the pastor at Trinity Zion AME Church here in Binghamton. So,
I'm going to go up to the pulpit. Equals a little bit better. Hi. Hello, friends. Blessings upon all of you for being here. I am here primarily not as the pastor of the Unitarian Universalist congregation, but as currently I'm chair of the Children of Abraham group, and I wanted to share a little bit with you about the response that happened in our community. The Children of Abraham is comprised of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and Unitarian Universalists together trying to be ambassadors of our faiths with each other and with the community around us. And it was about maybe midway into the 2020s where we were really pivoting toward talking about racism in particular. For a good long while, our focus had been on how to talk with each other across our faith differences, how to celebrate our faith differences and similarities, and the ways that we could be partners in activities. But we began to talk about racism because it was just too big of a topic to not tackle from a faith perspective. One of the clergy in Buffalo had reached out to one of the clergy here in our area, Corey Turnpenny, had received that call, and it was in recognition that the shooter had come from our community and that the people in Buffalo, their faith communities were suffering, and we wanted to connect. And so it came to the Children of Abraham as a group to say, what can we do to build this bridge, to reach out? And at the 6-month anniversary in November, a dozen and a half of us went to Buffalo and participated in a day-long meeting, convening, coming together. There was a hosted conversation. There were some groups, breakout groups, to meet each other and to have conversation and to learn about all of this. And it was very powerful. I can certainly attest on my own part, it was powerful to go and to listen and to stand in that space of my community created a murderer that went to your community and caused this devastation. And I am part of that responsibility. That was powerful. We came back and continued to work toward what else can we do? What else should we do? There was an effort during the summer after that at the Conklin Fair to host a table and to bring some conversation and to highlight that there was work for us to step into together. We had other conversations, and I stand here to say that those other conversations bore no fruit. The children of Abraham slowly faded away. I think we don't have to rest all blame on racism. I think the war with Israel and Gaza certainly broke the children of Abraham apart. The pandemic broke the children of Abraham apart. And it is a shame, for there was work we had begun of bridge building and repair. Some of that work did happen and has borne some fruit. And some of it could have been more. Certainly, I will name that a lot of the work that we did was among those of us who had actually no residential connection to Conklin itself. It was people from Broome, absolutely. And we are, while there are neighborhoods, we are a community. And our community created this. We've participated in it. And it's important for us to know that, to name that. And I'll leave it there. I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is the Reverend Demond Wilson. I serve as the pastor of Trinity AME Zion Church. I have the pleasure of being surrounded by fellow Zionites here in the room, so it's always good to be around family. And I think that's where I'm going to start my brief comments because, like Mr. Whitfield, there's a lot of different directions I could take what I'm about to say, but I'm going to try to keep it focused and in one direction. But one thing about the AME Zion, which stands for African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, is that it has the nickname the Freedom Church. It has the nickname the Freedom Church because it played a major role in the abolition movement. You're probably familiar with individuals like Frederick Douglass, who was a member of our denomination, also Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. All these members were stalwarts in the abolition movement, fighting for freedom. And it takes a voice to do that. Being willing, and for those of my theologians in the room, it takes speaking truth to power. So when the comment was made, what verses stick out to you when it comes to how to combat white Christian nationalism, this one came to me, and I wanted to pull it up because I wanted to read it verbatim because it's so powerful for me. It comes from the book of Isaiah, and it says, "A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, and every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together." So that sticks out to me because it's really a verse about equity. When it talks about the mountains, the high places being made low, it talks about the valley, the low places being raised up. It's talking about equity and how at the end of days, we will see an equitable kingdom. There will be no more the haves versus the have-nots. There will be no more rich versus the poor. There will be no more war because our swords will be turned into plow hooks. But there will be a day when there's truly equity. And that's the day that I look forward to. It breaks my heart when I found out about what happened in Buffalo At the time, I was just about 45-minute drive up the street in Rochester, New York, where the shooter actually had one of the tops in Rochester, which is up the street from my house at the time, as one of his potential targets. So this situation definitely touched me in a way that was really close to home. But the saddest part was that it wasn't the first time. And what I mean by that is that African Americans have been targeted and killed and lynched for centuries. So although this was a horrific situation, it wasn't the first. And the sad thing is that it's not going to be the last either. We still deal with forms of execution mainly through police violence, through other forms of racism and discrimination. We still see it today. So my thing is that when are we going to be that voice speaking in the wilderness, make straight the way for our Lord? Who's going to be that person who's willing to speak truth to power and be able to say, you know what, this is wrong? Because the thing is that, as Mr. Whitfield said so eloquently, is that when we're quiet, we're all complicit. We all play a role in that. And the thing is that we don't have to be the one to pull the trigger because we gave room for it. We allowed it to happen. We gave it the environment to live and grow. And the thing is this, is that especially when it comes to politics and dealing with everyday society, the thing is that we as the people, one reason why we are in a democracy is that we have the power to change things. That's why we live in a democracy. We have an election happening in a couple days where we have the right to go to the ballot box and say who we want to be in office. That's power, right? But what do we use our power for? Most of us feel like, okay, we're by ourselves. We're just one person. We don't have much power. But the truth is, all it takes is one person to stand up. All it takes is that one person to have enough courage to say, you know what? No, that is wrong. And see, what happens is that that one person becomes two. Two becomes four. Four becomes 8. And it just continues to multiply until you're able to change what's going on. So I'm actually going to stop right there because I feel myself about to preach in a minute. No, but I want to say this, and I'm going to pass the mic, is that we all can have that voice. We all can speak truth to power. Will you do it?
Thank you to all three of you for sharing your heart and being so eloquent. So I would like to take this next half hour or so to open this up to all of you. And we have a couple of other people who are resources for us in this conversation. Reverend Michael Bell, who is the pastor of Durham Durham Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Buffalo, and my colleague Rashida Tyler, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches, and also the project manager for the Affordable Housing Collaborative. But I'm going to, what I think we're really interested in hearing now is from you. What what did you hear? How are you feeling? And what steps do you think took place here to address what happened in both Buffalo and Broome County And how would you evaluate the adequacy or the inadequacy of those steps? And Mr. Whitfield really opened up and I think shared some really very honest, searching, probing questions. He's asking why, and I have no assumption that all of that will become clear in this next half hour, but if you can keep that in mind as you ask yourself the question, what happened and why did this happen? Okay.
Am I on? Yeah, okay. It might be helpful, I don't know. This is a statement that we put out as the children of Abraham that was never picked up by anyone. One of the things we noticed was we were not able to engage any of the clergy who were actually in the town of Conklin in the conversation. They wanted to handle it privately, the way white people like to do. But we wrote, and it was very aspirational, and I think part of the heartbreak is how far we fell short of what we hoped. A few truths that have come home to us in our journey with this story of violence that connects us to the people of Buffalo. We are connected not as victims or fellow sufferers, but as people who are deeply implicated in this and every story of white violence against black people. And the culture in which we are embedded allows us to distance ourselves from the perpetrators of white violence against black people, so we have not always felt we had to accept responsibility for what other white people have done. It took courage for Reverend Nicholas to reach out to the white people in our community and ask us to bear witness to the pain his people were suffering as a result of an act by one of our children, and I would say the same to you, sir. He took a risk that he might experience additional violence of indifference or hostility or refusal of responsibility. It has taken another kind of courage for us to see and hear the suffering, to acknowledge that just as every black person feels the effects of white violence, every perpetrator of that violence is a part of who we are. Our journey began by making a connection to the black people in Buffalo. We have promised ourselves and those we have heard from that we will continue to see with new eyes and refuse to look away when we are uncomfortable. To be faithful in fulfilling that promise, we will educate ourselves about our own culture so that we no longer see white violence as either an appropriate response to social problems or as something beyond our control. We will honor those who have died by holding ourselves and our communities accountable for doing the hard work of change. And we meant it. But we didn't sustain it, and we are aware and are having to confess that one of the reasons we still need to have these conversations is that more than 2 years later, we're still struggling to get ourselves into a position of making those connections.
Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Bell. I'm pastor of the Durham Memorial AME Zion Church. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. I drove up from Buffalo. I apologize for being a little late. To the pastor of this church, thank you for allowing this to happen. And to your officers. I just want to start out and in response to Reverend Cook. It says in Ecclesiastes 5:1, it says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. And then over in Revelation, the 18th chapter, it clearly states that at verse 2, he called out with a mighty voice, that's God, from heaven. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a spirit and a bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast, a spirited bird and a hateful beast. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. 4 weeks ago, I'm in a restaurant, and I'm meeting with, I'm just there, and I'm reading, I'm having breakfast. And there was 2 gentlemen that were there. I would see them from time to time, and we kind of joust with one another, and they asked me, "Reverend, do you own a gun?" I said, "No." "You ought to own a gun." I said, "It's my choice." And what came from that was that they handed me a sheet of paper and said, "We just came from a raffle over in Butler County, over in Butler, Pennsylvania. And we came from a raffle. They were asking $80 a ticket. And I want you to look at this sheet. There must have been about 90 guns and rifles on this. They were giving away $50,000 if you do." So I said, "How many people were there?" They said over 4,000 people. So if you do the math, that's about $320,000. They were giving away $50,000 in $7,500 increments, $500, $5,000 increments, and that's a lot of money to encourage people who live in rural communities. Butler, Pennsylvania is a hot place for Donald Trump. And that's fine. This is the political process. But after I sat down and thought about it, I thought about how we have unchecked groups in this country that are stockpiling militias in suburban regions, primarily rural regions, rural regions. And at the same time, the contradiction is in those same rural regions, there's a tremendous amount of suicides. In fact, those suicides have led the nation in 2022. 54% of the gun-related murders, according to the CDC, are primarily white men in rural communities. I'm not even talking about the excessive drug suicide because of drug abuse. And the silence is beyond me. So I'm lifting up a countercultural issue to say that while we have been silent, church, on the violence that's been prevalent around us, I heard it said somewhere that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and domestic tranquility. Well, Rome couldn't do it. They put nothing into the corpus of the community. This is how they operated. United States isn't doing it. We cannot settle this with more militarism, more militia, more people with guns. It makes no sense to think about having, allowing for an AK-47 or AR-15 to be put in the hands of military piece of equipment to be put in the hands of ordinary people, especially when they're not trained to deal with those things. I think of the Petraeus case. And he killed his girlfriend with a firearm. And he tried to get out. I remember talking to a friend of mine. I said, how many of these AR-15s do you have? He said, 2. I said, you have never been in the military, and I hate for one day one of your family members are just trying to get into your house because they couldn't reach you, and all of a sudden, they get shot and killed. Well, you don't buy an AR-15 to kill rabbits. Okay. Or deer. But during the American Revolutionary War, Washington gave those guns out to protect from Great Britain, Spain, France, Indian raids. We had called them Indians at that point in time, but we call them natives now. And black riots, African slave revolts. Well, we don't have a problem with 4 of them, but you still have protests that are called riots. Maybe you don't hear me. When poor people have a problem, who do they talk to? And there's a proverb that talks about how it is a shame that even God doesn't listen to them. Well, we're here today to say poor people around this country have a lot more power than we really realize, that the problem in the Garden of Eden wasn't much about a male or female with power, but it was about how both male and female as husband and wife got divided. And as long as Satan is able to divide, Satan can always conquer. And every political military strategy began with dividing and conquering. And so I just wanted to say that we can do more together than we can do alone. A few years ago, we were down here over 4 young black female that were, there was an issue at the high school here. And some of you remember that. My problem with it was that the mayor had come to make a decision on right and wrong without having full disclosure. And in making that decision, it's like me making a handshake with Satan. The problem is this country has always done that. It's always been about the backdoor treatment. The thing I love about my church, I'm a Du Boisian. I'm a Douglas man. I'm a Tubman person. I'm an abolitionist. I'm also my grandmother's baby. And the thing about Du Bois, he says, in Souls of Black Folk, that he wrote in 1902, 1903, he says that, and you have to get the image, that when you take an oppressed people where domination has continued to have just about sole authority, the lack of democratization is going to always be felt by the minority. And so if you want somebody to tell you what you're doing wrong, you need to come to us. You need to be able to listen to us. And that goes for women too, because you have not been able to get enough out of our women across the board to have safe environments. So whether we're talking about safe environments or we're talking about the fact that we're speaking truth to power, but we also speak truth to the powerless. Truth to the powerless. Truth to each of us that want to have more access to the power that a republic does not allow. But when we come together, we can gridlock that to get what we need. We can gridlock whatever it is that a republic continues to be resistant of in order to get those things passed. I'm having a problem with Project 2025. Project 2025 has in there some clauses that wants to put us back before 1920. And if they put us back before 1920, the simple problem with that is that the law has always in this country been used to, and it was codified to create a caste, to keep a caste, and to keep it in place.
So my name is Rashida Tyler. As Peter mentioned, I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the New York City Council of Churches. I'm also the Project Manager for the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative. And I did not travel over 100 miles from Kingston, New York, just to be a resource. I'm very sorry, Peter. But what I wanted to say, I came here because my background is in public policy. My background is in Africana studies. And I came here as my grandmother's daughter as well. She was someone who fought for women's rights, who fought for African Americans' women's rights, all throughout New York State. They were part of an organization for Empire State Women, and they connected with women, especially African-American women, around the country to help fund and fundraise for the Harriet Tubman Home. And so civil rights and human rights is very important in my family. It's very important in my church, which is the Amy Zion Church. I'm from the Amy Zion Church of Kingston. And so my background informs my worldview. My family history and culture inform my worldview. When I heard of the top shooting, I, like many people, were devastated. When I heard of the AME shooting at Mother AME in North Carolina, that was devastating. And talking with African American pastors around the state, the lasting legacy that is there is that we have to watch our back when we're praying. We have to look around at the community members. So while the advice of go to another church, a black church, is good on the surface, in reality, there's a fear there that has been created because this veil of white nationalism, white supremacy, has not been pierced. When we went to Buffalo, we've been doing these conversations across the state. When we went to Buffalo, someone got up and said, well, it's divisive to talk about race. And hey, listen, it's very uncomfortable. It is, and I imagine this is something that has been with our nation since Africans were brought here and enslaved, and even before that, with the Native Americans who were here. Race is a problem that keeps reoccurring because we do not have the courage to turn and face it. And it's uncomfortable. We have to do self-work. We can get up here and be panelists and say, you know, we're going out to everyone else and telling you what to do, but everything starts with self-work. Everyone on this panel has self-work to do. Everyone on this panel comes from a background, you know, that we have to learn our way around, and we have to learn our way to address. And so there's lots of resources out there. I think when I think of the efforts that were started in the Southern Tier to address racism after TOPS, what occurs to me is that a lot of things will fade away because people can afford to do that. They can go back to the comfortable church pew. They can go back to where they're comfortable at. But if we're actually going to make something last, we have to realize that being comfortable, that comfort, was actually part of the problem. And I always say, if you go to a dentist, right, and you have a toothache, and they say, well, I can give you some Novocaine. You're gonna be comfortable. Don't worry, I'm gonna give you Novocaine. You keep coming back, your toothache keeps hurting, because they didn't fix the problem. So it takes a lot of deep self-work. And one of my things I was gonna talk about earlier, I don't have enough time, unfortunately, was to talk about how we became white, how we became black in America. Those are social constructs that were intentionally created to draw divisions and to draw lines between people of different ethnicities to prevent people from coming together. Because if we always have a point of permanent stratification, then you have less of a threat to those in power and those in corporate interests who rely on people not getting along, who rely on people not coming together and realizing that they have more in common than anyone would think. But if we think about being white in America early on, when people of African descent who were enslaved were brought here, there was not a punitive assignment to color. Audrey Smedley, in her book, Race in North America, she's an anthropologist out of the University of Virginia. She traces how race was introduced into America by the planter elite. Because originally, if you were African, you came here, you could gain your freedom by becoming Christian, you could gain your freedom by marrying, and there would be an end to the enslavement. Seeing that people were freeing themselves this way, the planter elite assigned punitive conditions to being black, and the one-drop rule was created. If you had one drop of African blood, no matter what, you and your descendants would forever be enslaved. And that difference separated the black enslaved from the white indentured servant, and it created a permanent caste system in America. And it's something that all the way through till today, it perpetuates itself. Race serves a function. And it is vital and important that we take it upon ourselves to unlearn those lines that were drawn and to talk to our neighbors. This conversation, I guess it was proposed to have in African American churches. And I'll say this coming from the African American church. We've had these conversations. We love and appreciate that you have opened your doors and your space in a church that is not traditionally African American and are having this conversation. This is where it starts. This is the self-work. Thank you.
So, Kimberly, if we went to 610, would we be able to do that? Would we be okay?
They
All right.
don't start admitting the unhoused to the shelter until 7. So we will not be disturbing them if we stay later.
Thank you. So I really want to return back to my original question to all of you. Kind of what happened? What steps were taken in personally and in this community, and where did you see the inadequacy in that? And then what do you suppose how might you act moving forward? So I'd really like to hear from all of you. So.
I'm just holding the mic. I'm happy to hand it over to anyone who has something to share.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. Mr. Whitfield, I have sent a lot of prayers of my own out to the Buffalo area, and I knew the young man that committed this this terrible act. I knew his parents, okay? I did not know them well. They both worked in the state office building where I worked at the time. I was in meetings with the father. He was a member of our union, and I remember, attending some things with him and so forth. And there's no way I would have expected that he would have a child that would do something like this. And it has ruined their family too. I mean, I don't know where they are now, but they're no longer in the area. And it was just, because of my interest in it too, I don't know where he apparently would go off onto the computer and get involved in all this hate stuff. And it's just, I would never have expected, knowing the parents pretty casually, but to think that they would have a son that would go that far, out of the norm. I mean, this is just unbelievable. And like we've talked here, these things do happen over and over again too. And I don't know how we stop it, but we all have to try to do better, and we have to, we have to learn to live together. And the biggest thing I've said over and over again is hatred. That's what's going to ruin this country. We can't have a country filled with hate. It's just not, and you talk about your mother. I buried mine a few years ago, and we're all human beings, and we all, and we all try to, live a decent life. And it's just awful when something tragic like this happens. And, it just, It's unbelievable. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I just want to say that hurt that family, they hurt this community in ways that you don't even realize. I had a grandson who was 18, he got a job in Conklin, and he was going to work evenings, meaning he would be coming home at 10 o'clock at night. His mother was like, no way, you're not working out there. So, you know, it puts this shadow over all of it. And for all of us to sit back in our own homes, in our comfortable spaces and say, oh, that was horrible, they need to do something about that. They is us.
Yep.
We need to step up. I step up. I'm a retired nurse. I was a military person before that. I'm trying to give back my service as a Christian, which I learned from age 2, 3, and on up. We got to do some kind of service, some kind of way, and everybody gives at different levels. Find the place that you can give. There's a local NAACP here. Anybody here supporting that? Those who feel the sympathy. I'm just saying there's little things. And a very, very tiny thing we can do is evaluate our language. Was it a dark and stormy night yesterday, or was it just a stormy night? Why do we have to continually use words associated with black and brown as bad? Because this is what we're teaching 3- and 4-year-old kids, that that's something to stay away from. Thank you.
I think, thank you, and thank you. I think that what we have to understand is that this did not start on 5/14.
Right.
This didn't start on 5/14. So when you talk about language, these are intentional things that are a part of the fabric of our society historically. These are the things that have been used to you know, dehumanize us, to paint us in a certain way. So, you know, I appreciate your prayers. I really do. But, you know, Scripture says prayers without works. Okay? You know, prayer is not a noun. It's a verb. And it requires you to do something. Everything about God, everything that I know about him, he says, if you take one step, he'll take two. Knock and the door shall be open. If you seek and you shall find. That means we have a part to play. We have a role to play. And we have to do our part. He's going to do his. But we have to do our part. So, but thank you.
I guess a comment I'd like to make is, I heard, as you said, and as many of us felt, how could someone that far be that far from the norm? And that's what happens when you don't notice that the norm is that your culture is so racist that you don't have to feel anything personally to swim in white supremacy. And we've got to find ways to talk about that, because I don't know how that happened to that kid either. His parents were probably perfectly nice people. As far as I know, they were church-going folk. What are we teaching? What are we learning? What are we crafting that not only makes those behaviors happen, but also allows us to say, I just don't understand it, because I don't understand it, but we got to try.
I'll offer one quick check-in on any young white men that you know. Do you know any young white men? A young white man in his 20s or his 30s? I have a son who's in his early 20s. And I will stand here and tell you that I'm not so sure that he has received the progressive, open-minded, heartfelt love that my spouse and I have offered all our children. I think he's angry. I think he's hurting. And I don't think unbelievable is enough. I think we should check in on the young white men around us.
Reverend Christie started out by centering us in Scripture. And I just couldn't help but to notice this wonderful wording up there. And somehow the reality is, if I asked you, what does the cross fly higher than the flag? How many of you would say yes? Raise your hand. If the cross really flies higher than the flag, then that centers all of us into a world of deeper understanding and deeper commitment to something that transcends all cultural distinctiveness and brings us together and begins to unify us. If I said that NYSEG hires 99% of white people to work at NYSEG that you have here, majority of those that climb up the poles, electrical work, come out of your your rural communities. That's just as evil and lacking of equity as cutting off those in, I mean, that's 514 just from a different perspective. We are not looking at the bigger picture and seeing how we can be instrumental in changing the status quo. The capital in Project 2025, the corporations want to even expand their profitability and moving more of their monies into militarism. We're already spending 53 cents on a dollar, and that should be, as they say at Walmart, rolled back. Because that's been the money laundering that's been going on to that 1%. Not so much the military people. You've got good people that are doing good things. But there's the highest margins that you can have. So whether it's a 514 or we come out of Buffalo, Millard Fillmore signed the Fugitive Slave Law Act of 1850 in September 29th of 1850. You know, we've been living this a long time, but we can do more together than we can do alone. And my concern with Binghamton is you've got a lot of good people, but we have not created synergisms to say we are better together. And I would hope that out of this comes forth something more dynamic that urban and rural communities can do together. Because at the end of the day, as Brother Whitfield said, you know, that boy from Conklin was, you know, displaced. He just got the wrong information. But how many people in this country get the wrong information and act on the wrong information? We must do better. Thank you.
So I have one brief point, I promise, one brief point. This is one thing that I hope everyone here will do over the next few days. We have an election that is coming. There's a lot of tension in that election. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. They don't have to support the same people you support. Talk to them because, and I say this because right now, there are warnings out in Fulton County, Georgia, in Gwinnett County, Georgia, that there are white supremacists that are coming from Pennsylvania, such and forth, down to the South, because they're trying to take their country back. And they're targeting black women, because black women have been a force out there, mobilizing people to vote. Regardless of whoever wins this election, it is going to be something where we have to have community feedback. We have to have people who are in the community talking people down. And one of the ways is just to talk to somebody, say, how are you doing? Check in with them. If you catch someone and they're saying, oh, this and oh, that and oh, that, you know, hear them out, listen to what they're saying, try to offer things that will help calm and reduce that. Because I think the more of these interpersonal connections, these conversations that we can have, the more likely it is that person's going to say, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do this. Maybe I don't have to go out and do this. The country isn't ending. Nothing is being taken from me. you know? And I just think that's very important. It's something very practical. You don't have to go out and, you know, stage a huge protest or anything like that. Something revolutionary happens when we talk to each other. Thank you.
So this really invites, I think all of us get a little bewildered. I know I do. Well, what do we do about this? And maybe don't always feel like we have the agency to do something. But I'll tell you that we met with a group of clergy in Springfield, Ohio this week, who met with the Justice Department. There were about 40 clergy in the room. It was pretty evenly divided between black and white clergy. And what that community, I think, is beginning to do is to say that we have to work intentionally on our relationships with one another. Not, you know, just, oh, we had an interfaith whatever service, you know, but showing up in each other's churches to build some relationships and build some resilience. And one of the suggestions from the Justice Department was that they should really, that clergy across the spectrum get together to meet regularly once a month and maybe have subgroups that work on particular policy things that get brought back to the group as a whole, and then to really sit down with politicians and say, you know, these are things we're wrestling with, and to do this. So this can't be done by one group of people or one group. It has to be, you know, it can start small with a few people just trying to build some connections and then building it out from there. And then the other thing I would just say is that when you're at your dinner table with relatives who are sharing things that might make you bristle, stick with the conversation and do things like, tell me more why you think that way. Help me understand. And build that sense of relationship. And then please don't ask yourself why we had Conklin happen when you have political ads spewed all over this county saying the most vile things against immigrants, and not as a populace take responsibility for that rhetoric. That politician is putting that out there because he thinks that that's going to resonate with all of you, and I mean that in the largest sense. And it's really up to us as a faith community to speak to our faith, to just be showing up, speaking out constantly from the pulpit, out in the streets, to say this is just an unacceptable narrative, and we cannot be rewarding people politically for that kind of language. So, but anyway, other thoughts that you might have, these are some things we've been thinking about, but other thoughts you might have based on your experience about what steps might look like going forward. Maybe we're all wet and you have a completely different idea, which is great. But
I just want to pick up on the last thing that was said, that I don't not think much is going to be solved by good people talking to each other about things we all understand. I mean, I learned a lot tonight because I heard about firsthand experiences that I wouldn't have known, and I feel very sorry about your situation. But I don't know what to do about that person in Broome County, and I don't know what led him to do what he did. And I think we have to talk less and start talking about changes in laws that make it less likely that those kinds of weapons get in the hands of people who are irresponsible, that there are background checks for anybody who has a weapon. And we just need to take, I mean, there are other things too to reduce racism, like cutting the link between local taxes in school support, right? Why is it that poor school districts spend less money on their schools than rich school districts do? Exactly, but that can be changed. And even though this may sound hypocritical because I'm saying that churches shouldn't try to legislate morality, I don't think this is theology. This is just common sense public interest legislation.
So, if I could, this is a deeply theological matter, and the policy happens, which is absolutely essential, when people start building some relationships with one another and showing up and really organizing to coalesce around some things that matter. Pick a couple things here that really strike home in Broome County and go for it, you know. And so I'm just saying that the relationships that you build make it much easier to do the policy work, which is so necessary.
I also want to say to that, hate can use a gun, it can use a car, it can use a knife, it can use any implement that's out there. We can create laws, and we should be advocating for laws to reduce the likelihood that assault weapons are out there. I fervently believe that. But also that mentality of hatred and that you have to violently take something or oppress someone that you believe is taking something from you. That is also dangerous as a bullets in a gun, as dangerous as someone with a bad motive in a car.
Really, one of the biggest problems we have as white people is that we believe that we are supposed to have been successful. And anytime someone isn't successful, they look for someone that isn't them to blame it on. And who do we blame it on? Well, you can't blame up because those folk are successful. So you got to blame down. And we've got to do something about that because that is 180 degrees from what Jesus said.
But the eugenics movement was not a movement that was based upon that theory. It was the one that preserved privilege.
That's right.
Okay? And so when I talk about the codification of laws, laws were also created to protect privilege. And those laws were constructs pretty much from the top.
But it's the contradiction we've got in the culture that we have to address, that we say anybody can be, you know, Poor People's Campaign has had such a hard time getting people connected this time because nobody thinks they're poor. Or at least they don't want to say, yes, I'm poor. Temporarily inconvenienced, maybe. So we got to find ways to address both ends, that it is in fact the privileged who are creating the stuff that tell us that if we don't succeed, it's our own fault. So we have to look for somebody else to blame so it isn't our fault. That's all a cultural construct too. And we have to find ways to say, wake up.
I'm wondering if I could, Mr. Whitfield, if you might. I I wonder if I could, Mr. Whitfield, if you might react a bit to what you've heard here and any other reflections you might like to offer about a way forward.
Thank you. So this has been enlightening. But again, as much as we need laws, as much as we need to codify protections that will, provide for equitable opportunities within our communities, I think the real work is right here. Is connecting one with the other, is seeing, we talk about how race has been used and how all these different terms, how poor is now something that being classified as being poor keeps people from participating in the Poor People's Campaign, which is crazy on the surface, right? So we have names for all of these things. How about just a child of God? How about just a person, a human being? Why can't we just see each other as another person who God saw fit to create and breathe the breath of life in? That's all we are. Everything else is made up. Everything else is temporary and it's made up. Everything else is. If we just see the humanity, that's why all of these laws, all of these things are done to take us from self, to keep us from seeing each other, to keep us from, to see each other as the problem. I mean, that's what this is all about. They pit one against the other. It's the trick of the enemy, the devil. They pit one against the other. And we keep drinking the Kool-Aid, I mean, and that's all this is about. If we see each other as human beings, that is what they don't want us to do. That's why everything is divided. We're divided, whether it's the churches, whether it's our schools, whether it's our communities. As people, we're divided, and we allow that to happen. And that's what we have to fight against. And so we have to be willing to come to places such as this, for me, a place of discomfort. And I don't know what it is for you. I mean, you're at home. I hope I'm making you a little bit uncomfortable. Because that's what I came to do, honestly, because that's what it takes. It takes you being willing to be uncomfortable to grow beyond your circumstances. We have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to challenge ourselves and to take risks, because that's what they do every day. That's what they do, They leave no stone unturned to perpetuate these injustices, to bolster themselves politically. They have no rules. That's one of the problems we're having in this current election. We got one side playing by a set of rules, so to speak, and the other side saying, the heck with the rules. We're going to do whatever it takes. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be as intense, as intentional, and as committed, even more so than them. And that's why it seems like they're winning, is because we got comfortable pews, And we're comfortable. We're too comfortable. Yes, sir.
Could you bring the relationship, George Washington once said, he said, complaining is easy, governing is hard. And since you're planning to enter into that level of politics, how would you suggest to governance that we must change some of our fundamental understandings and some of our fundamental ways of operating?
Well, I mean, for me, you're talking about governance and authority and that. I think that real leadership does not grab power. Real leadership empowers others, okay, and builds people up, not put them down. Real power is when you can give it away. You know what I'm saying? When you're not threatened by someone else or something else. I mean, that's powerful.
Wasn't there a song like that in Free to Be You and Me in like 1972? Love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more.
Yeah. And so, you know, this privilege that, you know, the replacement theory talks about, I mean, you know, not directly, but that's what it's referencing. Privilege. People are willing to protect their privilege. They shouldn't have had it in the first place. It's not like you deserved it. It's not something you should have ever had. So the whole premise that you're going to protect something that you should have never had is crazy. You know. Again, I think by doing this, I'm here because I wanted to look you in the eye. I needed to do that. And I know you guys didn't kill my mother. I know that, you know, but I needed to be here. That's why I'm here, because I needed to look you in the eye. I needed you to see me, and I needed you to see my mother. It's not some abstract thing. She was a human being. We're human beings. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. And once we do that, it becomes real, right? I'm a person. I'm not some number. I'm not something, you know, abstract that you don't have to see. And so when we do this, when we challenge ourselves, I think we have an opportunity to grow in a way that we never would. And so I hope that's what you take from this. I hope that by you having been here, you'll take that back somewhere to your kids, grandkids, to your neighborhood, to your parishioners, wherever it is, and plant the seeds and start these conversations. That's what this is about. So I'm glad I came. I hope you are too.
May God's love never let you go. I say in benediction.
So this is a beginning of a conversation. This is not the end of one. We just tried to open the door here a bit today, but it's really is a challenge for you to bring this kind of conversation to your other faith communities, to people who are close to you, people who you don't think really need to hear this because they already understand. Those would be good people to talk to. But also to some diverse people and groups where you show up and make yourself a bit uncomfortable and be in a listening, connectional kind of posture. And that can translate into advocacy. I mean, to come to this community, but come to Buffalo and reach out and just keep trying to bridge those divides. And let's see what emerges. I got a lot of faith that we can do this. So, right.
I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I do hope that as we have begun before, we can begin again and continue to begin until at some point we don't have to begin again, because we'll just be on the road together. I do want to thank those of you who have traveled many miles to be with us. I also really want to thank Scott, without whom we would not have had most of the microphones and the lights and the other stuff that he has provided, and also Becky, who's been in the lobby fielding people so that they ended up where they needed to be instead of wandering in here wondering what we were doing. So I'm going to say that's my last word. Does anybody else want to have a last word? Okay, let's pray. Holy One, we thank you for bringing us together, for helping us to wrestle with hard things and to look each other in the eye. We thank you for the stories we have heard. Allow us to cherish them and ponder them so that they may become the seeds of your reign on earth. Bless the efforts that were made to get here. Bless the sharing that has happened. Bless us as we go back out into the night where it is cold. Keep us safe and in your care. Bring us back together in your good time, and finally save us in your kingdom. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Kimberly, for being such a generous host and opening up this space to us, and for your leadership here in this community. The last time I was in this space, it was packed with the Poor People's Campaign, and that was pretty energizing. And yeah, it was great. So we just kind of want to keep building on that energy and those connections that we saw that night, and how we continue to work at that day by day out in this community. So